Just as the summer is ending, Europe is engulfed in a new crisis, this time over hundreds of thousands of refugees and immigrants seeking a better life or political solace. This is Steve Wiseman at the Peterson Institute for International Economics with Jacob Kirkegaard of the Institute, who studied immigration issues in Europe, especially for many years. Jacob, first of all, where are these immigrants and refugees coming from?
Well, we're talking about a mixture of mostly refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, a number from various African countries. And then there is a significant number of more, shall we say, economic migrants from really the sort of entire periphery of Europe, the Western Balkans, parts of the former Soviet Union, and large parts of Northern Africa as well.
Why did this start this summer? Or why did it grow so dramatically this summer?
I think it's been brewing for a while, but what you have had in the last couple of years is really the collapse of several major states in the periphery of Europe, Syria, Libya in particular. And what that has meant is that you now have essentially a vacuum of governance. So all illegal migrants coming from most of Africa, for instance, now go through Libya. They will typically pay human smugglers and others for the transport across the Mediterranean, but there's no government functioning there to regulate it. And in some ways, the situation is the same on the Turkish-Syrian border, where obviously you have millions of refugees coming from Syria. That the Turks are often, unwilling, or in fact more than willing, to let continue their travels onto the EU.
The Europeans have mixed feelings about this, welcoming this new influx. And by the way, tell us how big a situation this is. But the Europeans have mixed feelings. The Germans are more welcoming than other countries. Why is that?
Well, I think this is in many ways a good subject for Germany, if you like. Both for economic reasons. Germany is probably the country in Europe that has the most need for its own demographic reasons for attracting large numbers of immigrants. Germany is also a country that for many years now actually have been the destination for very large numbers of immigrants. And the German economy is doing very well at the moment. They're at full employment, in which case there are no sort of concerns over new arrivals potentially taking jobs away from Germans. So this is really, in some ways, economically quite beneficial for the German government. And they can easily afford to pay the extra costs of housing these new arrivals. This is obviously much less the case in other European countries, notably Greece, but also Italy and elsewhere, where the fiscal costs are higher and obviously the existing unemployment rates are also much higher. So politically, it's much more tricky.
France as well?
France is less directly affected, but obviously because levels of unemployment in France remains very high, it's about 11%. And economic growth there have been sluggish. So this is not, and you obviously also have already the growth of the National Front there, which is a generally anti-immigrant party in France. So both politically and economically, it's a bad issue, if you like, for France.
So how many immigrants are likely to be able to stay in France? I mean, in Europe, when this episode or this phase is over?
Well, I think here it's important to recognize just how big a destination for migration the EU has become. Not recently, but actually over the course of the last couple of decades. I mean, last year, and this wasn't in the headlines or anything, more than 1 million migrants arrived to the EU. Levels that are comparable to that of the United States. So what we're likely to see now is a number significantly above that. I mean, recent estimates suggest that maybe 500,000 extras, most of those going to Germany, will arrive. So you could be looking at up to 1.5 or more million migrants arriving to the European Union, which is, as I said, considerably more than the 1 million that you saw in 2014. But it doesn't change the fact that inward migration into Europe has been very, very high throughout the last 15 years or so.
And on balance, do these newcomers contribute to economic growth, or do they contribute to economic difficulties?
Well, I think in the short, sort of in the immediately upon arrival, there are significant costs associated with. They need to be housed. They need to have some sort of transitioning, learning, potentially learn the language or other things, housing. So there are short-term fiscal costs, but in the long term, I don't think there's any doubt that more migration is a significant economic benefit for the European economy, and particularly economies such as Germany, but also Italy, that face substantial long-term demographic decline otherwise. The key issue here is whether or not they're employed or not. And there, traditionally, there has been, some concern that the difference in employment rates between the foreign-born migrant population and the native population, which in a number of countries in Europe is very significant. But at the same time, this has actually been improving quite a bit in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years. So if you take the two largest destination countries for migrants in the EU in recent years, namely the UK and Germany, it is actually the case that the employment rates for the foreign-born population there, or migrants, in these two countries is higher than migration, the employment rates for migrants in the United States.
Are they taking jobs that native-born citizens won't take, as is the case sometimes said in the United States?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that is the case very often also in these European countries. There may also be examples of where there is direct competition between native workers and recent arriving migrants. But having said all that, I think in the aggregate, in terms of the functioning and the size of the overall economy, this is, in my opinion, an unambiguous net benefit.
And you would make somewhat the same case for immigration in the United States, or am I?
Yeah, no, I by and large believe that is true in the United States too, and especially arguably in the United States, because you have the situation in the United States, unlike in most European countries, that the employment rate of immigrants in the United States is actually higher, or at least the foreign-born part of the US labor force is actually higher than the native-born. That is not true in most of the EU, but would certainly suggest that the economic benefits of migrants, arguably in terms of their employment record at least, is higher than the native-born population. But there's also other issues that are affected by this. And I think there are many people who for a number of years have been calling for extra fiscal stimulus from Germany to help the sort of broader euro area rebalancing and things like that. And if you look at what the costs of maybe housing up to 500,000 extra people might be, estimates suggest 3, 4, maybe even 5 billion euros. That is easily 0.2, 0.3% of German GDP, which will probably wipe out the projected otherwise surpluses of the German government budget. And you add to that a potential fiscal multiplier, etc., then you actually get a meaningful fiscal stimulus in the next 12 to 18 months in Germany from this, which many of the traditional critics of German economic policy should welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacob.
My pleasure.